You can take it away.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna start sharing. Hope that everybody can see that. Works well.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. So today I just put together a little presentation with a lot of pictures about two, I wouldn't say like groundbreaking emerging crops, but definitely something new for Wisconsin, which are day neutral strawberries and especially organic production, and also seedless staple grapes. So, they're pretty traditional crops, but the reality is that we don't grow either one of these crops right now here in Wisconsin. And both of them have quite a bit of potential. And my lab is running some research on both of them. And we have a couple of grants for these two crops. So just thought maybe like I'll just talk about why are they new, what are the potentials that they had, and what are some of the data that we've collected and the opportunities and also the challenges that we see with these two new fruit crops. So let me first start with the day neutral strawberry production that we have here. This is a grant that we got through NIFA. This is an organic transition grant that we have in collaboration with the University of Minnesota. So we're working on this project together. And the idea behind this project was that when you think about Wisconsin and you look at the ag stats, Wisconsin is, I don't know, I think it's in the top 5 states of organic production. But when you look at those numbers and you break them and you look at fruit production, Wisconsin is 0.3%. Like we produce no organic fruit whatsoever, nothing, very, very, very little. And so what we started thinking about is like, well, I mean, we know why this is, but the idea was like, what can we do about it? Is there something that we can do to try to increase organic fruit production here in the upper Midwest? And it was certainly the same is true for Minnesota. So let me just give you a little bit of a background. The first thing that we know is that there's an incredibly high demand for organic fruits at local farmers market. We did a survey before we wrote the grant. And every single one of those farmers markets that we surveyed said that they actually did not have any organic fruit, and the ones that had was minimum. And as I say, there are only 18% of the local demand for this organic fruit is met in Minnesota and in Wisconsin. There's obviously very, very low acreage of organic fruit production, and the reason why this is this way. When I was saying like Wisconsin has so much organic production of vegetables and grains and all of other crops, but not fruit crops, is that we have a really high pest and disease incidence. And why is this? It's because fruit crops are perennial fruit crops. Okay, so perennial means you have an orchard for 30 years, 35 years. You have a vineyard for the same amount of time. So over the years, there's an increase in the inoculus, especially of diseases, but also of pest. So it's not the same when we try to grow, vegetables or some other like row crop that is going to be organic, in which at the end of the season you go back there and you clean everything and that's it, and you start sort of like with a completely clean space the following year. So that makes growing fruit organically really hard here in Wisconsin. Another problem that we have is also weed management. The same thing, perennial crops. There's the weed control that you can do is a lot more limited compared with annual crops or crops that have annual cycles. So when we started thinking about this, it's like, what would be a good alternative to think if we can increase organic fruit production? And that's where this idea of transitioning into day neutral strawberry production came about. And the University of Minnesota had done quite a bit of research on growing day neutral strawberries already. So we're like, okay, well, let's get together, let's think about how we could do that. And that's how this project came about. We thought about transitioning into this day neutral strawberry production. And so for those of you that maybe are not very familiar with how we grow strawberries, the traditional way that we grow strawberry here in the upper Midwest is what we call a mated row system. Also, a lot of people hear the word June-bearing strawberries, and you probably are familiar if you consume any strawberries that if you go to any UP here in Wisconsin, you are going to go specifically during the month of the end of June, maybe the beginning of July. That's the only time during the summer that you can find those strawberries, that you can go and pick strawberries. So here's what it happens, how you plant them. You establish these June bearing strawberry plants in, relatively long distances. I mean, there's quite a bit of space in between the plants. And what happens the first year of this planting is that those plants multiply. You ended up having a lot of daughter plants that are produced from these. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but that you can see from this initial plant, this mother plant will produce a lot of daughter plants. And so the first year you just have a lot of vegetation going on. And then the following year, you start having your first flush of flowers. And so if you look at this looks something like this. You end up having these rows with a lot of plants. And these June-bearing strawberries, they're conditioned into photoperiod, so they need a shorter photoperiod to induce flower induction. And this usually happens in the fall. So you plant them the first year, you multiply the daughter plants, you have this huge field full of strawberry plants. Comes fall, they get flower induction, and then come June, they'll have one big flush of strawberry production, one bloom, and you have all of your strawberries at that time. And then you're done for the year. Those plants are mowed, cut down, and then they rebuild in the month of July, August, and September. They go to flower induction again, and then we go over and over again. And you can have the same plants and the same strawberry patch for anywhere between 2 to 5 years. And then around the 5th year, the productivity drops. And so people decide to replant or find another spot to plant. And so that is the way that we traditionally grow strawberries here in Wisconsin. I would say 99.9% of the strawberry production is June-bearing production, and it's conventional production. However, day-neutral strawberry, the name says is they are neutral to photoperiod. They will produce flowers regardless of the photoperiod, whether it's a long day or a short day. They'll continuously be producing new flowers. It's a different system. They're grown on these kind of raised beds, usually with plastic mulch. And the reason for that is that they're very, very, weak competitors with weed. So that helps control weeds. And as I was saying, you can see in this picture here on the lower right corner, you can see those berries are ready to be harvested, and then you can see new flowers. So this is a very extended growing season. So you plant whenever you can get into the field, hopefully early May. You get your plants established. Those plants are going to start, producing flowers right away. You start getting fruit, and then you can go all the way until, the end of September, sometimes the beginning of October, depending on the fall, and you will continuously be harvesting berries all season long. So this extends considerably the amount of time in which you can provide fresh fruit to the marketplace. Also, because at the end of the season, everything is taken out of the field. This gives us this advantage of try to break that cycle of pests and diseases and weeds. And so start every season in a new spot and plant them all over again, very similar to like if you were doing a vegetable production system. And so that really allows us to be able to grow them organically. And that's what we're trying to do. But it's a different system, and there's a lot of things that are, that have to be researched, but also have to be introduced to growers that might want to transition into this new system, especially already established berry growers that might consider, there's an opportunity here. Maybe we could grow these day-neutral strawberries, especially organic strawberries, and shift a little bit our market. But among those things that are very different is the establishment of these raised beds and the use of mulches. So one of the things that we're specifically testing in this research that we're doing, we're interested in different types of mulches. So you can see that picture on the right. That is last year when we were planting our trials at UW-Madison Research Station. And we had different types of mulches. So this white that you can see here is the traditional way. This is the most common one, is the white on black plastic mulch. Then we had a black plastic mulch. You can see a lot of this in California. All of the strawberries that are grown in California and Florida are day-neutral strawberries. We had a biodegradable paper mulch, and then we also had a metallic reflected mulch that we are testing. And so the idea was that these mulches might have, based on other research that we've done before, some advantages for insect control. Okay, so if we can reduce our insect problem, everything is easier when you're growing organic if you can reduce insects and if you can reduce diseases. So that is what we're testing for this particular trial. And so one of the things that are different about growing day neutral strawberries is that you have to have, equipment to build these beds. You need to have equipment to be able to lay the mulch. And obviously this is, it demands investment in equipment, but also just learning how to do all of these things. Here's another image of when we lay those plastic mulches here, and then you can see how it looks after we planted them. You can also see that there's a lot to figure out. What are you going to do with the alleyways? In this case, we had organic annual rye that we planted there, but there's a lot of other research that can be done just thinking about what is the most efficient and also economically viable way of maintaining those alleyways and trying to control weeds in there. How we establish them, and this is more or less what a bed looks and how many plants you put them. The distance, we usually plant them in 2 rows per each one of these raised beds, that they're separated by about 18 inches, and then each plant is separated within a row for about 12 inches. And then you can see on that image our paper biodegradable mulch that we were testing with the strawberries that probably were planted about like 2 to 3 weeks before. So that's how it looks after that. So let's talk a little bit about the yields. What are the kind of yields that you can achieve with this system? So here's some preliminary data that we collected last year for cumulative marketable yield per plant, which is in ounces. And you can see the solid line is Wisconsin and the dashed line is in Minnesota. We did have a little bit of a different experimental design. And so, the numbers are sort of comparable, but there are differences between the 2 sites. But what I want you to look at is that the first thing that I want you to look at is the length of the growing season. So we started harvesting somewhere in very late July, and we continue all the way until the 2nd week of October, until we got the first really, hard frost. So all of that time, there were organic strawberry production in southern Wisconsin that, if you're a grower, all the time you can be providing all of that either for UPIC or specific like farmers market. So really much longer window of harvesting. The yields were good. We did see some difference between, the metallic and the paper seems to work a little bit better for us than especially the black. The black mulch, very commonly used on vegetable production, does not work well for strawberries because the strawberries really like cool weather. So the black plastic mulch got too hot and the plants were suffering from heat stress. And we actually did see during the growing season, the tip of the new leaves that are coming out from the base of the crown would have, a little bit of it, they were a little bit burned. So black mulch just doesn't seem to work for us. But, the metallic one and also the paper one, surprisingly, the paper one, that is the biodegradable one, seemed to, be quite good. I also want to say that this is the cumulative market yield because as you can, assume there's a lot of fruit that has multiple defects. We also had diseases and we had insect damage. And so this is not the overall yield, but just the fruit that we consider would be, would meet the commercial standards to sell them. Some of the issues that we saw during the growing season, tarnished plant bug is a big strawberry pest, whether it's June-bearing strawberries or day neutral strawberries, they love them. And so you can see that image in the upper left hand, that's a little bit of a deformed fruit that is the tarnished plant bug just with their sucking mouth, just hard damaging the berries and the flowers. We also got some diseases. Anthracnose is this one that you can see on the upper right hand. That's something that we saw quite a bit after rain events. We also had some, smaller fruit and unpollinated fruit. And then the last one that you can see here on the lower right hand is a frost damage. So that is at the very end of the growing season when we started seeing some of those berries got hit by the frost. So, there's definitely some issues. I have to say, we didn't do a single spray for disease control. Most of our disease control was just, picking and picking and picking, making sure that we were cleaning and cleaning and cleaning the field, so there was no fruit left behind that could start rotting. And then we did one application of organic insecticide for controlling tarnished bumback. So in general, very clean. We didn't have to do a lot of things, and our marketable yield was about 85 to 90%. Not the case in Minnesota. They actually did have a huge decrease in their marketable fruit. They only were able to harvest 45 to 50% of all the berries were considered marketable. So they had a lot more incidents of diseases than we had, and also tarnished bloodback. So these are this is how they look. You can see those beautiful berries there in that reflective mulch, a lot of extra light, beautiful color. And then you can see a tray of what we would typically harvest from our harvest zone in one day. At some point during the growing season, we had to go and harvest sometimes 2 or 3 times during the growing season to keep up with all the berries. So let's look a little bit at extrapolating these numbers of yield, and what does it mean in terms of acreage. So if we extrapolate our study exactly with our 2 rows and with the planting densities that I showed before, is about 12,100 plants per acre. That's a lot of plants. And when you extrapolate the yield that we had, the cumulative yield, well, you can see that, anywhere between 25 to a little bit more than 30,000 pounds per acre of marketable fruit. And then, they're corresponded for total yield. So that's quite a bit of fruit, especially, and I think I added there, if you compare it with the June bearing that you get one flush at the end of June, beginning of July, that usually is somewhere between 8,000 to 12,000 pounds per acre of fruit. So a lot more fruit that you get here. Now, this is where things get interesting, is that when we did our when we did our survey of the farmers markets here in Wisconsin and in Minnesota, they did have some growers that are producing organic day neutral strawberries. And so we were able to gather some data from them, but specifically we were able to gather some data from the farmers markets that they were selling their fruit. And so they sell their fruit easily at that farmers market for about $10 to $11 a pound of organic day neutral strawberries. And they get the same price if they sell them from their own farm. So that is, really, really interesting. One of the growers sells at a larger scale to some cooperatives, and he says that even for them, he gets about, something around $6 per pound. So that is so much more than you would ever get for June bearing strawberries. So there's a huge potential that is unmet. Nobody's growing here in Wisconsin any of these strawberries, and certainly not organic. So we were really there's a huge potential for growing them, and we show just with 1 year of data that you can successfully grow them here in Wisconsin. Some of the things are different, and here's where those $10 per pound sound great, but some of the things that are different about growing the day neutral strawberries, as you can imagine, there's a lot more labor and cost. I talked about building those beds, the mulch, the equipment that you need, but also they need to be fertigated. Because they are under mulch, you need to irrigate them and you need to provide nutrients. So that means also that you need to invest in a fertigation system, and not only invest on it, but also think about learning how to use these systems and learning how to provide what the plants need during the growing season so that you can achieve those maximum yields. So there's investment in just equipment, but also the time of learning how to do this. And the idea behind the day neutral strawberries to get adopted for Wisconsin is that we know that we have a lot of organic vegetable production here. And so one of the things that we were really hoping for is that some of these vegetable growers, considering that the system is so similar to producing, I don't know, I mean, it's not the same, but very similar to producing, let's say, tomatoes, that you still have to fertigate them. And especially if you're using mulches, that they could adopt this as having a source of fruit production. So those growers are much more familiar with fertigation. But if we think about new growers, or maybe some of the traditional berry growers that they don't have to deal with any of this, they would have to invest in this and also learn how to use these systems. There's more labor involved than in June bearing strawberries. One of the things is the clipper of the runners. I explained that in the June bearing production, you establish plants, and then during those first year, you get all of those daughter plants. Those daughter plants are produced by these runners that you can see here that will produce new roots and produce a new plant. But in the case of day-neutral strawberries, you don't want daughter plants because you want all that energy to go into producing fruit. So you need to clip all of these runners, and that's quite a bit of work. The harvest from the end of July all the way until October, you can imagine harvesting 1 to maybe 2 to 3 times during the growing season, requires a lot of labor. Other issues such as weeds, even though we have the plastic mulch, is you still get a lot of weeds creeping up into those beds, and you can see these 2 images here at different times during the growing season. So we've been talking with some of the organic day-neutral strawberry growers in Minnesota, and one of the things that they're using is landscape fabric in between the rows. They're keeping those rows much narrow in between those raised beds, and they're using landscape fabric. So that would be an alternative, and we haven't tested. It was not part of our research, but there's definitely new things to improve. The other thing that we're not testing in this particular study is that there's a huge potential of growing organic day-neutral strawberries in protective structures, like in anything. Like you have a high tunnel or maybe a caterpillar tunnel, and then you take out of the equation all of the issues with diseases, which in a year that we get a lot of rain, I mean, it's hard to keep up. Those berries soak so much water, and we just need to toss those berries. There's nothing else that you can do. So that would be something else. And so this year, we're going to have our second year of data. We've been doing a lot of webinars about day-neutral strawberries. We have a lot of information on our YouTube channel. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but if you just go and you Google Fruit Wisconsin, and YouTube probably is the first thing that's going to come up. And then also on our website, fruit.wisc.edu, we have a lot of information that we are putting together, videos about how to scout and things like that I think they're going to be very valuable for those that are interested. So that wraps up the what I wanted to talk about day-neutral strawberries. I don't know if people have questions now. Maybe we can entertain questions at the end. But the second fruit crop that I want to talk about, this other project that we have, is seedless table grape production. So this is another crop that we don't grow any table grapes here in Wisconsin. All of the grapes that we grow here in Wisconsin are mostly for wine production. I'll say 95% of the grapes. Very, very little seedless table grapes, but there's huge interest for them. And this is another one of those crops that could be added into, somebody that, let's say, has a vineyard for wine production. What is a little bit, a couple more rows for table grapes that you could, make a profit out of them, maybe, have like a U-pick or sell them into these farmers markets that are really interested in getting local fruit production. There are some older cultivars that they are seeded of table grapes that had been grown in Wisconsin, very old ones. They don't have a lot of appeal because they have seeds. These are probably traditional ones that they make like the grape jelly from. They tend to have a little bit of that kind of foxy aftertaste from the Labrusca vitis, that is one of the wild grapes. And so older ones, they survive the winter here in Wisconsin, and some people have them in their backyard, but they don't have the same potential or interest as seedless table grapes. That is what everybody likes, and that's what I assume most of us buy from the store because you cannot get them locally. However, the University of Minnesota has a grape breeding program. A lot of our wine grape varieties are coming from that breeding program, and they've been recently working on developing seedless table grapes that have improved cold hardiness. The problem with a lot of the table grapes, if you think about table grapes that they grow in California and in other parts of the United States, all of those are not cold hardy enough to survive the winters in Wisconsin. So we just can't grow them here. But with this group in Minnesota developing these new cultivars, there's a huge potential there to come up with a new market for local table grapes, seedless table grapes. So let me tell you a little bit about the story of how we ended up here with testing these seedless table grapes. Many years ago, there were some seedless table grapes trials here at UW-Madison and also at the research station in Door County, Powers, the Peninsula Research Station. There were about 12 cultivars planted in 2007. And then there were an additional 4 that were added in 2011. So those trials were up there in Peninsula and here. Oops. So here's a list of all the different cultivars that were tested. You can see there a lot of them come from Cornell University that also has a great breeding program. The University of Arkansas that has also a great breeding program, and from all over the place we tested all of them. They were all planted and all tested. However, that trial ended, and the reason why it ended was because of cold damage. A lot of those seedless table grapes were not cold hardy enough to survive the winters here in Wisconsin, and so we learned that many of them were just like they just died within the first maybe 4 or 5 years. That's it. We never got a crop out of them. Other thing that we learned is how to grow them properly. Most of those trials were based on a training system that is called VSP, vertical shoot positioning. You can see here the picture of this group of my grad students at the time they were pruning them, and so those shoots are growing up. That is really not an ideal training system for this kind of grapes that really like to grow downwards, and so we've changed it, the way that we're growing them to more what you can see on the image on the left, this high cordon in which the shoots, instead of growing in an upward position, grow on a downward position. We also learned about their disease susceptibility, very similar to the wine grapes. They're also susceptible to powdery mildew and to black rot and things like phomopsis. All of those problems will also have them here. So they definitely need to be sprayed. Unfortunately, very difficult to grow them organically. And the other thing that happened during this trial, we had a master's student that worked on this trial, Jean Riester-Loper. She did a consumer survey and used a lot of the grapes of the varieties that actually did survive, and we were able to harvest fruit. She did a lot of consumer surveys and testing and tasting of these grapes. And oh my God, people were so excited about these grapes. I mean, everybody's like, oh, the flavor is so unique, it's fantastic. Where can we get them? Where can we buy them? And so there is definitely a huge interest because these grapes, I mean, the taste of these grapes are superior to anything that you can get at the grocery store. So we know that there's a big market and a possibility for these seedless table grapes. So obviously, new trial, we tested all of this variety. We say, like, we know that there's a market possibility. Let's write a grant and let's see if we can start a new trial in which we could test some of the cultivars that did survive the original trial of 2007, and let's add some of these new selections from the University of Minnesota. So this is a collaboration with Jason Fitchback. We're working on this table grape project together, and we were funded by DebCap to do this. And so, as I said before, what we did obviously is selected those that we thought had performed relatively well in the previous studies, and these are the names of some of them, like Mars, Relier, Somerset Seedless, and Montreal Blue were some of them. And then we added 3 selections from the University of Minnesota breeding program that we're testing here. And we added new locations. So the first trial was only in 2 locations. Now we have this replicated in 5 other locations. So we have one up in Bayville, in Richland Center, in Chippewa Falls, and Sturgeon Bay, again at the research station, and also we have one at Spooner. And some of these locations are actually grower collaborators that established some of these cultivars in their already established wine grape vineyards. Here in Madison, we established the new trial earlier before we actually got this grant. We planted in 2018, 2019, and we have a little bit different varieties. We only have Mars, Relier, Somerset Seedless, and 2 of the selections from Minnesota. So that was planted between 2018 and 2019. If you remember, you were here, 2019, 2020 was the last polar vortex that we had, and all of our vines, everything that we had grown for the first year went all the way down, and we had to start all over again. The plants did not completely die, but we had to retrain them. So basically, we think about these vines as planted in 2020. And so last year we had our first harvest, and you can see, oh, sorry, and I forgot to say, the other locations were planted in 2022, so just last year. So it's only at this point the trials that we have in West Madison, the one that we're collecting data for yield data. So here's a picture of the beautiful table grapes that we harvest this year. The fruit was beautiful. It tasted great. We had some really, really nice fruit, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the metrics that we collected and yield-wise what we saw. But you can see here the beautiful colors. We have multiple colors. We have from this really nice, beautiful clusters from Mars, tend to be a little bit bigger berries, and they're purple. Reliance that has this beautiful color depending on when you harvest them. The thing about table grapes that is different from wine grapes is that anything that you eat in terms of fruit is this ratio between the acidity and the sugar content. When we think about production of grapes for wine, we really want that sugar to be very high because that sugar is afterwards converted in alcohol through the fermentation process. In the case of the table grapes, we actually don't want really high sugar. We want to find that specific balance between the sugar and the acidity that makes them interesting, that makes them pop, that makes them feel like fresh. So we don't have to harvest them with really high levels of bricks. I mean, there's no point of having to wait to get to 25 bricks on any of these table grapes. So you can harvest them at different times. And in the case of Reliance, you can see how the color changes quite a bit depending on when you're harvesting them. Somerset Seedless is so pretty with this pinkish color. It's beautiful. Then we have some of the Minnesota ones. We have this one that is a traditional green color, and then this more really black and dark color from these 2 selections. So let me tell you a little bit about what we learned from this first harvest. First of all, these table grapes are ripe much earlier than wine grapes. So we harvest them in mid-August, when we harvest a lot of our other vineyards for wine grape production. We actually start harvesting about a month after that. So these ones come a month before. And as you can see here from these pictures, the birds love table grapes. So they had a feast with our table grapes. Actually, we lost a lot of our yield just because we were on our schedule of thinking about growing wine grapes, and we never thought about oh my God, we need to net them earlier than we net anything else. So netting is a must, and it has to come really early because the birds love them. They are, as I said, are ready a month earlier, and especially if you have a very dry summer, I mean, the birds are going to go directly to eat all of your table grapes. The values of acidity, measuring tradable acidity, were between 10 to 18, which is pretty, reasonable. As I said, you could have a lot more acidity in this type of grapes, which is not necessarily what you want on wine grapes, just because that acidity brings up that freshness, which is not necessarily the case when you're making wine. In terms of bricks, we harvest them, the different cultivars, between 14 and 20% bricks. That's what we got. And then the yields that we got were about 10 pounds per vine. And in some cases, especially on the Minnesota one, much less, because those actually were planted a year after, so they were smaller vines. We're hoping that this year on 2023, this growing season, we're really going to get some more accurate yield data, and hopefully the years to come, we're going to continue collecting data for several years. But they seem very promising. The vines look great. They're all food established, and so we are really we're looking forward to keep collecting data and see what happens with this vineyard. So this is at West Madison. The other location, as I said, they planted the seedless table grape this year. So some of the data that they're collecting there, they're really important, especially in the more like northern sites. Vine survival, really critical to make sure that all of these selections, but also the cultivars that we have identified as potentially good cultivars, really do survive the winter up there in the northern parts of the state. We're collecting pruning weights just to figure out the vigor, how much, how much they grow, how much they require in terms of labor when it comes to the canopy management. And the other thing that we're also interested in looking at, and I don't know if this is part of what we wrote in the grant, but phenology is also really important, because spring frost can definitely affect grape production, and we do see a lot of spring frost damage on our wine grapes. So if these cultivars are also a little bit earlier in bud break, they're going to be at a higher risk of having cold damage during the spring. And so that's something else that we're also interested into looking into. And that is all I have for you guys. I don't know if we have any questions.